Today we're going to be talking about Busy Bees. And you guys know our usual agenda is to go through a quick introduction. We'll talk about bees, then we'll go over some activities and some extra resources for you to learn more. So I think all of you have joined before, but my name is Megan and I'm Aiden and Lizzie's mom. And I work at scientist.com with your moms and dads, and I love science. And we're chatting today because you guys are still out of school, but your moms and dads are working and you need an education. Okay, so
Megan,
now, yes.
I've got a cuddly that's a bee, look.
Oh, really? That's very cool. I like that cuddly. You must like bees a lot.
My dad really likes bees. He bought a book about them.
Oh, very cool. Well, you might already know some of this then. So if you have any things to add, please go ahead, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So to first talk about bees, we're going to talk a little bit about insects. And insects have an exoskeleton. So you guys might remember from our skeleton class that an exoskeleton means it's a skeleton on the outside. And that skeleton is usually made of chitin, which is a kind of protein. They have three main body parts: the head, the thorax, or the kind of middle, and then the abdomen at the end. They have a pair of antennae on their heads that might wiggle about when they're doing bee things. Insects have 3 pairs of legs, and they also have 2 pairs of wings. So in this example here, you can see all the parts of the insect pointed out on a bee specifically. So bees are flying insects, and they're really closely related to wasps, which makes sense, right? They seem similar, but they're also really closely related to ants. And if you remember before when we talked about evolution, I showed you some of those kind of family trees of different animals. And this family tree for bees shows that insects kind of diverged and they started to have wings, and then the wings folded, and then they started to produce larvae. And then if you get really kind of far along down this progression, you start to get to the Hymenoptera, which are wasps, bees, and ants. And many of those are eusocial, which we will talk about as well.
I don't like wasps because I've been bitten by some.
Yes, I've been stung by a wasp too, and it is not pleasant. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and we'll show you some of the differences between bees and wasps. So bees and wasps are in the order Hymenoptera, and it's a very large order of insects. And when I say order, it means it's kind of like a grouping. So remember, there's different levels of grouping animals together, and one of those is actually called a group, which makes it a little confusing, but there's like group, family, genus, species, etc. And this order of insects also includes things like sawflies, it includes ants, as I mentioned before, and bees and wasps. And there's over 150,000 living species of Hymenoptera that have been described. So it's possible that there are many more that we don't know about that are somewhere in the wild. And we know of about 2,000 that are extinct. So here are some examples of the Hymenoptera that actually sting, which is unpleasant for us. But you can see the yellow jacket, the hornet, the wasp, a southern fire ant, and then the honeybee. And these are distinguished from other insects because the females usually have a special ovipositor, which means it's kind of like a tool, a body tool that they use to lay eggs. And it inserts eggs into places that are otherwise inaccessible. So they couldn't just leave their eggs kind of laying around. It puts them somewhere kind of safe. And it's often modified into a stinger. So the other thing that differentiates these insects is that they have a worm-like larval stage and an inactive pupal stage before they mature all the way. So they actually have some different stages as they're growing up. And the first one, they kind of look like little wormy things. And then when they turn into pupa, they actually don't move or anything. They're just kind of in their little pupa house or in their shell almost, and they kind of just hang out there until they metamorphosize, which you guys might know that word from caterpillars turning into butterflies. So bees and wasps are actually not the same. Some of the differences between them have to do with their hair. So bees have branched hairs on their body, and wasps and ants have kind of like a single hair, if you can see here. So see all the little branches coming off on this bee hair, and then over here it's just a single hair coming out, almost like human hair. But you might notice that bees look kind of fuzzy and friendly, and wasps are kind of, excuse me, I thought I was going to sneeze. Wasps are kind of naked almost, and ants are too. They don't really have a lot of hair on their body. So the hair that they have is single, and it's kind of spread out. One of the other big differences is their diet. So bees are herbivores, and you might remember that means that they just eat like plants and things. And they actually choose to eat pollen and nectar from flowers. Ants are omnivores. They'll eat anything. So you can see here they're eating a chip. So ants will eat dead things they find on the ground. They'll consume like flowers and things. That's a lot of times why ants might visit your picnic, right? Because there's a whole bunch of different things for them to eat. Wasps, on the other hand, are actually carnivores. And if you guys remember our discussion of when we were talking about different types of eaters, kind of during one of our other lessons, carnivores means they actually consume basically meat. In this case, they are eating an arthropod. So you can see there, that one is actually snacking on a tarantula. So wasps actually eat meat, which is really interesting, and bees don't. Bees are just snacking on honey on pollen and nectar. So the other thing that I found really interesting is there's a lot of diversity, and diversity means differences. So if you have a group of something together, but they're all very different, that means they're diverse. So like, let's see, when we do our drawing and I have all these different colored markers, they're all markers, but they're different colors, so they're diverse. And there's over 16,000 known species of bees in 7 recognized biological families, and they're actually found on every continent except for Antarctica. They can't really live there. But they live basically anywhere that contains flowering plants. And so I want to show you some of the species specifically in the United States. Oh, and I'm opening this up twice, oops. So I really like this poster. Can you guys see my poster? Cool. Okay, so this is from University of Minnesota, which is our next door neighbors in Wisconsin and our rivals, but they did a good job on this poster, so we'll use it anyway. And it says more than a bumblebee. So I really like this because it shows that only 1.4% of the over 3,600 known species of bees in the US are bumblebees. So the rest of them are other kind of interesting bees that you might have heard of before. There's carpenter bees that might be unpleasantly digging into wood in your house. There's sweat bees, which you might have seen in the summer when you get all sweaty and they're kind of visiting. There's leaf cutter bees that actually do what their name says, leaf cut. And there's a lot of other different ones too. Carter bees, kind of like little woolly plants. There's mason bees and mining bees, and they all have, you can see digger bees. They all have names that kind of indicate what they do, but there's a huge diversity of these type of bees. And some of the species, including like honeybees, bumblebees, and even stingless bees, live socially in these colonies. And they're all adapted for feeding on specific types of nectar and pollen. And they use that as an energy source and also for protein and other nutrients. So most of the pollen they gather, they use to feed their babies or their larvae. And that pollination is really, really important. And we'll talk about that a little bit next. So back to this slide. So this is the Western honeybee, which is also called the European honeybee. And this bee is actually domesticated almost. I guess it's not domesticated necessarily like you would think of with like a cow or something like that, but humans utilize bees like this to basically do work for us. So they are eusocial, as I mentioned, and they're part of the group or the genus called Apis. And they're all actually native to Europe and Asia or Eurasia, but they've been spread to the 4 other continents by human intervention. And so they're known because they construct these big nests made of wax, and also because they store surplus food in the form of honey. So honey and wax are both things that we use. And in the early 21st century, like so at the beginning of this century, we recognize about 7 species of honeybees and about 44 subspecies. So there's still a lot of diversity within the bees, but the best known one is this Western honeybee because we use it for honey production, wax production, and also for pollination. So as I mentioned a couple times now, they're eusocial, which basically is the highest level of organization that you can have in a social group. So they're cooperative. They work together. You can see here they're on this big sheet from a hive, and they're actually working together to care for offspring or for babies of other individuals. So it's kind of like bee daycare, and they all work together to take care of the babies. They also have overlapping generations within the colony. So there might be grandparent bees and baby bees and all different ages of bees, and they're all working together. The other thing is that they divide their labor. So just like humans divide labor, so I'm good at science, and so I do a specific job, and someone else may be very good at their hands, so they might be a carpenter. Someone else might be an airline pilot. We divide our labor amongst people so that everybody can do something that they're good at, hopefully. And bees actually do something similar. So they have specialized groups within their kind of colonies that do different jobs. And we distinguish this kind of system from other systems because there's usually at least something that one group can do that another group can't. So if that makes sense, so like I can't fly an airplane and the airplane pilot might not be able to do my job. So we can't really swap that out easily because we're specialized. And so that's kind of what defines this type of social system. They also have a hierarchy. So they, yes.
I've got a book that in a part says, in Spanish, that in a part says that the groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the groups are sometimes called castes. And so they're different specialized groups, which I think is really cool. So within this hierarchy, those groups are kind of spread out, and there's workers and there's drones, and then there's only one queen. So you can see the queen is this kind of long bee right here, and you can see a picture of her again right here. And the drones are a little bit kind of bigger and fatter, and then the workers are a little bit smaller. And so in their colony, they have one fertile female. So that means the queen is the one that lays the eggs. And then the other females that don't lay eggs are called the workers. And then a few of the males that can help fertilize those eggs are called drones. And individual colonies of these bees can house tens of thousands of bees. So like if you've ever been to like a big football match or something like that, where there's 12,000 people in a stadium, if all of those people were bees, they could fit into one colony. So these colonies of bees get very, very big. And as you can imagine, if there's that many people or that many bees, you have to be really good at communicating with each other. And you might remember from before, communication is a way to basically send messages or signals between different individuals. And so there's a couple different ways that the bees communicate in these huge groups. So I'm going to show you a really interesting way that they communicate, and it's called the waggle dance. Yes.
I was going to say before you came up with that they do the waggle dance to show people, the other bees, where like a good amount of flowers is, or where there's lots of pollen.
That's very true. Okay, so if you guys can see can you see the video screen? Thank you for the thumbs up, Titus. Here, we're gonna play this in here. My favorite, Sir David Attenborough, tell us a little bit about bees dancing. So, as you can see, the bee is actually doing a dance to show everyone else where the items are, which I think is really cool. So they can tell the other bees how to find these special flowers and things. And it's actually pretty specialized.
The duration of her waggle indicates...
Sorry about that. It's actually pretty specialized. So she can waggle or wiggle for different amounts of time. And she can tell them different things like direction and distance and things like that. So the rest of the bees that hang out with her can go and find these really rich sources of food. One of the other ways that they communicate is pheromones. So if you remember from before, we were talking about how sometimes animals communicate with scent or pheromones, and they might be doing a weird smelly thing with their lips. Well, bees kind of do something similar. So pheromones are substances that are secreted or released by an animal's glands, and they really get a behavior response from another animal of the same species. So it's kind of like a scent signal or a smell signal to someone else of what they need to do. And so in honeybees, a lot of times they'll use their pheromones to communicate with members of their colony. So maybe the queen might signal that the swarm should cluster, or somebody might signal that there's an attack or something like that in the colony. And so it can actually, she can influence worker activities. She can tell the males that it's time to come and fertilize the eggs, or the little guys in the cells. And she can do a bunch of different things to basically tell them with scent what it's time to do. And the bees' activities are actually really interesting as well. So they do a couple different things that we use as humans. And one of those is creating beeswax. So beeswax is a natural wax that is made by honeybees in this genus. And it's formed into these little scales, or kind of tubes almost, that have 8 sides on them. Or 6 sides? I think I said that wrong, sorry. So it's into the honeybee pattern, or the honeycomb pattern that we're all used to. And it's formed by these little glands in the abdomen of the worker bees, and they have about 8 of the glands. And then they come and drop this wax off at the hive. And then the workers in the hive will collect it and use it to form these cells. And the cells that they create are used for a couple different things. They can be used for the eggs and the larva. They can be used for protecting the pupa as well. And they can also be used for storage. So they're kind of like a storage unit for the bees, or a crib for the babies. And so the beeswax has a lot of different like fatty acids and things in it. And it's been actually used throughout recorded history, and also through prehistoric times, as a type of lubricant and waterproofing agent. So you can see here someone is waxing their furniture with beeswax. And we've also used it as for candles. So you might have seen beeswax candles, or even in like cosmetics, or things like chapstick. You might buy beeswax chapstick to help keep your lips moist. So it's actually edible, and it's approved for food use. So it's a pretty safe compound, and it's all made by the bees. So when they're storing things in the beeswax in those cells, if they're not storing larvae or pupae, they're actually storing honey. And honey is, I think you guys probably all know what honey is, but it's actually made by bees and some related insects, and they produce it by gathering the sugary liquid that comes from plants, so nectar, and then they regurgitate it, which sounds kind of gross, but they're actually kind of spitting up the nectar that they bring back. And then there's some extra kind of transformation that goes along with it, but the bees will then fan that liquid, and then once the water kind of comes off of that, and there's some enzymatic activity, it actually turns into a thicker liquid called honey. And the honey is stored in the big wax structures, and when they're all together like this, we call it a honeycomb. And a lot of times we see, honey in just a jar form, and it's actually extracted from those combs. So a beekeeper might come in and scrape the top layer off the cones, or off the combs, and then spin them really fast to have all the honey come out. And then there's usually some beeswax and maybe some debris in there, like some old pupa cases or, you know, some dust or dirt, and they'll strain that out as well. And honey actually can last for a super, super long time too. It doesn't really go bad. So honey can be stored, and it's actually been found in places like the Egyptian tombs and stuff. There's really old honey that we found. So people have been eating it or using it as a snack, I guess, or a treat for a very long time. Because the same thing that it does for bees, which is give them a little bit of energy, it can do for humans. The other thing that bees do that's super important that you guys might know about is pollination. So pollination happens when pollen grains are transferred from the male of one flower to the female of another flower. And that is how plants really create more plants for the next generation. So a lot of times they can, like, the pollen will get transferred over, and then there's some kind of complicated stuff that happens, but then the plant can produce offspring and make seeds or make fruit or flower if they have this cross-pollination. So it's really critical, as you can imagine, for plants to reproduce to have a pollinator. And pollinators aren't only bees. So bees are often pollinators because you see they collect the pollen on their little back legs. So you might see pictures of bees with a little fuzzy, it almost looks like a little tiny bag of pollen on their legs. They're kind of like little transporters. But other animals are actually really important pollinators as well. So pollinator is a name for an insect or an animal that transfers pollen. And some of these other pollinators are in this cool poster that I found. And you can see bats are important pollinators. So are butterflies, hummingbirds are a really good one. And pollination is only part of what they do. So this leads to a lot of biodiversity, which means a lot of different types of animals and plants are able to thrive. It helps keep, carbon sequestered kind of to the environment. It helps with erosion control. We like to see them when we're out doing recreation. So having these plants grow is really, really critical to our ecosystem overall. And it's also really important for our food security. So if we can't grow the crops that we need to eat, then people won't have enough food. And so bees are really, really important for that especially. So because bees are kind of declining right now, you guys might have heard of some, bee die-offs and things that are really kind of serious. There are some things that we can all do as humans to help out the bees.
Pesticides are killing a lot of bees.
You're 100% right.
Global warming.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things we can do is not use pesticides or herbicides on our lawns. So pesticides kill insects. They might kill insects you don't want around, like fire ants or something like that, but they can also kill bees. And herbicides kill certain types of plants. So the less we use of those, the better. You can also ask your parents if they don't mind to maybe let a little portion of their lawn grow long. So if you have longer plants, almost like a meadow or natural plants, for the environment, the bees really, really like those, and they're a good environment for bees. You can also keep a bee garden, specifically with flowers that they like. So bees really like mint, they really like lavender, they love poppies, and there's a bunch of other things actually that they like as well. And you can plant things for other pollinators too. You might plant certain bushes for butterflies or certain flowers that hummingbirds like. You can also support your local growers and farmers markets. So a lot of times local growers will have honeybees and you can buy honey directly from them. And supporting local growers also helps to support our pollinators. So you can ask your parents maybe sometime if you can go to the farmers market. Also, you can educate other people about bees. So I know a lot of people are kind of afraid of bees because they equate them with wasps and they think they're going to sting, but honeybees are actually not aggressive. They only sting when they're really threatened, and they die after they sting. So they really don't want to sting you if they can avoid it. So honeybees are actually really good for the environment. They're really good for us as humans, and we should definitely try to protect them if we can. Okay, so for our activities today, we have, for little kids, you can choose a picture to draw. You can draw a bee, you can draw a flower, or you can draw a product from bees. Or as a fun bonus, you can do your own bee waggle dance and videotape it and send it back to me and tell me what you're trying to tell me with your bee dance. For big kids, you can draw a picture of a honeybee and a honeycomb. You can make a comic about how bees communicate, or you can write a couple sentences about why pollinators are important. Middle schoolers can write a paragraph explaining why bees communicate and how they communicate. You can draw your own diagram of a bee and label some of the parts, or you can create a comic about pollination. And you guys know that if you email your homework to me, I will put you in the drawing to win an Amazon gift card.